Thank you for joining us and welcome to the keynote address by Professor Michael Barrett, the 2016 Distinguished Scholar for the OSIS Division of the Academy of Management. Professor Barrett is currently the Academic Director of Cambridge Digital Innovation and has previously served as Head of the Organization Theory and Information Systems Group, as well as Director of Programs in Innovation, Strategy and Organization at Cambridge Judge Business School. As a senior scholar in org theory and information systems, Professor Barrett has had several editorial responsibilities in our top journals, including senior editor of MI's Quarterly, Information and Organization, and the Journal of the Association of Information Systems, associate editor of Information Systems Research, and an editorial board member of Organization Science. The OSIS community is indeed pleased to have him as our distinguished speaker this year. We now join Professor Barrett in his keynote speech where he reflects on and provides insights from his experience as to how it has developed in the IS field. He will discuss his knowledge expeditions over the years in the area of social materiality and service innovation before giving his latest thoughts on how we as a field need to make contributions to both our academic field and more widely to practice and for policy development.
About how we might go forward with looking at practice theory. And what I want to highlight then is, for everyone in the room who is involved and interested in practice theory, to think through, what has been. This is what I've been working through. What's been my approach to practice-based research? Where are my blind spots? Where have I not been foregrounding? And even, I have to highlight work with a current doctoral student, Karina Frey, who really has also brought that forward in thinking about how, in this case, accounting practices are enacted across time and space, which has brought a different dimension to the importance of how we think about practice theory. And maybe just as for those that might be skeptical as to whether there's more room in this practice theory, here's a hint. So an ex-doctoral student of mine, Angela Aristido, has written a piece with Michael Smets, who many of you may know, in institutional theory, and it's called Practice-Driven Institutionalism. And so there we see that there's going to be lots of life once institutional theory gets a hold of practice theory going forward. But those are some of the things perhaps for everyone to think about on practice. And indeed, the other key sort of blind spot for me was between the 2006, around that period, was to revisit and say, well, how am I taking account of materiality? Indeed, this social materiality was starting to become very important and fashionable a couple of years after that. But the idea of my ontology considering the importance of social material relations in practice was heightened, and that led me to really make a stand on where I sat with respect to materiality. And this is something that we all have to do. For me, I found many approaches interesting, but Pickering's view and his early work in '93, which challenges the use of ANT, which I had used in the late '90s, concerning the level of symmetry between human and non-human agency and understanding how practice emerges, I found very useful, and particularly from my own ontology at least, a view that one needs to think about the asymmetrical view of human agency, despite taking non-human agency as very much important symmetrically in influencing how practice emerges. The intentionality of human actions was still significant and helpful to foreground in the analysis. So this is why I found Pickering's work in the Manual of Practice to be particularly helpful. And also in terms of its use of the dialectic of the resistance and accommodation, the way in which a language is needed that one can draw on, because for me at least, to make that switch in analyzing and writing up a piece or work that takes seriously human and non-human agency, the dialectical view was very, very helpful. So that's just to give you a sense of where and how my journey developed. And we looked at this, actually it was a very boring study, to be very honest, but a very helpful study. Let me give you a context. The work I'd been doing just before this was with the World Health Organization. really fascinating, rich, complex, traveling all over the headquarters, field offices. Much harder to get a grasp on how to contribute in this particular space. But to have a basement hospital dispensary, less than the size of this room, half the size of this room, and that's why it was boring, because there's about 10, 12 people in the room. This large robot is introduced to the dispensary. It still offered almost a very manageable, contained place for ethnography to be carried out to understand the problem, or to understand materiality through how the robotic innovation was influencing the work practices of the different occupational groups. So very helpful from a field perspective, field work, site perspective, and great collaborations, by the way. Just a quick note on that. The access to this came at a conference. It was actually 2004, I believe. There was a meeting or a presentation in which the pharmacist academic said, we would love to collaborate more with people in IT in this area. And I took him up on it. I rushed over and said, are you serious about that? It so happened that his wife ran this particular dispensary in London. And so it created a really wonderful opportunity to get more invested in healthcare and to work across disciplines and boundaries, though that can be a challenge. So what we saw from the study was, the Magla practice and the tuning process. It was great for the technicians, a bit like Barley's work very much before that in the 90s, because technicians became interested in the technology. They were able to take on new roles, new satisfying roles of programming. They could build vendor relationships. The pharmacists said, you go to it. We don't want anything to do with this new technology. We like robots because they flag to the general population that we are in the 21st century. We're a bold, new profession that is going places, but the technicians can have that. The pharmacists wanted to leave the dispensary. They wanted to be up on the wards, working more with patients and doing more research. And so the real pain, though, came for the assistants, who were the ones collecting the drugs on the floor, which you can imagine right here, this very large, not very attractive robot, like a big cupboard, but which was taking over and requiring them to be tied to the machine to feed it constantly for it to operate well. And so what we were able to develop from that was understanding of how boundary relations between these different occupational groups changed and shifted along with the introduction of the robotic innovation. So what were some of the quick recap lessons for me on contributions? Again, scholarly contributions will always be paramount, but for me I learned a lot through starting to engage with different professional groups, pharmacy and other healthcare disciplines, which I hadn't been involved with up to that point. At the same time, I was getting involved with a large knowledge transfer translation project, which took into account also public policy as well as engineering design, and that was very, very fruitful. At the same time, it made me start to reflect upon what's the scope and the bandwidth that I can possibly engage with and contribute effectively to. Pragmatically, there are in each of those groups different technologies, ideologies, different ways of working. I was sharing with somebody actually it was Marlene Husman there, who we were saying how healthcare has a very different way of thinking of public publishing. They have different requirements, different speeds, turnarounds, the involvement of everyone on the project being a co-author, so 12, 15 people is not abnormal, whereas, as we know from management, it's trickier to have a paper with so many authors on it. So many things to educate and to work through. The last expedition I want to mention is the current work that I'm doing on service innovation in a digital age, which got going in 2008 with an IFIP 8.2 conference looking at, with Liz Davidson, on IS and services. And And some of the work, what's really, as was mentioned at the beginning by Emma, the whole shift of how technology is really transforming lives, it has really become a passion for me, as Jeff would say, is how is technology making a difference in the world, and is it? And in this case, financial inclusion, where you've got, in Kenya 10 years ago, 10% of people having access to the financial system. At the same time, you had over 70% with mobile phones. And so you can see the magic potential that actually was realized. How did this project get started? I called up an ex-PhD student who, after finishing, went into the Silicon Fen around Cambridge. And I said, Carl, how are you? What are you up to? What are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm deploying this new system, which actually hadn't hit the headlines yet. And I said, it's fascinating. This is a mobile payment system. And indeed, the research got going through that collaboration. Today, you have 50% of Kenyans having access through this mobile money transfer system to financial markets. 38% of the GDP goes through the system. So for many of us in IS, this is a wonderful success story which we'd love to have many, many more of. But it's been a delight to unpack what does service mean? And from a practice perspective, how can we understand the customer involvement? How do we start to understand the role of service platforms? There's Ola, Henfredson, and Youngjin Yu and others have made very key contributions in this area. And indeed, we're looking at, myself and Wanda Olakowski and Ava Holborn, looking at really the understanding of the development of these ecosystems and how innovation trajectories take on and develop or not in different countries. This whole sense of what we call interaction of the innovation trajectory with trajectories of place around economic development, and how we might understand that by taking looking at the practices is something which we're quite excited about. And we're actually extending this work going forward. Annika has also been very involved with this work. To look at how mobile platforms might be able to provide access to clean energy and the implications for climate change. And so the different value creating opportunities that mobile platforms can provide is significant. And the interest as well, just before going on, is working with doctoral students as well, Stavros, that looking at understanding value in different ways, going beyond understanding it from the point of view of a productivity or financial perspective, to see all the different ways of conceptualizing value, whether it's in healthcare or in financial services, is an important way of understanding value co-creation in services. And that's where some of the research is going. Quick recap, this is in terms of what kinds of contributions this helped further develop. Well, I was very delighted, and I think Arun Rai is here, in the sense of, MISQ offered an opportunity to develop a special issue which drew in marketing colleagues who had done a lot of work in service around SD logic, and so that we could explore different theoretical trajectories in understanding service innovation in the digital age. It also, though, threw up for me more generally, as the shift around making a difference through technology becomes more central, is how do we design and organize our research with a wider set of stakeholders from the beginning? Which stakeholders are we trying to affect and why? These are questions which, again, if we're going to be making wider contributions to different stakeholder groups, we need to think about this very early in the process of the research. And indeed, many doctoral students are now doing that, very much as part of the research design. And it's something which I think is so central in thinking about how we transform the way in which we do our research. So in the next sort of 5-7 slides, and then I'm done, I want to really talk about some of the changes that I think we're all facing, maybe different in different local contexts. Certainly in the UK, this is really ripe. The sense of, I'm sort of influenced here by Giddens again with the late modernity, but the institutional reflexivity. How is the research landscape changing? Huge pressures of accountability we're having in the UK through rankings. There's a lot of bean counting, a lot of salami slicing for A publications. This is what I believe Albert Einstein said. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And this is certainly something which I would certainly echo. And I like the quote below it, in that I think we need to be, as an OSIS community, as business school academics, really making a concerted effort to shape the mission. You know, the ranking agencies are taking over in that sense as to what constitutes research and how we go about doing our research. And so, as two of the ex-presidents of the AOM have said in a recent article, 2014 article, we need to really consider multiple stakeholders in how we contribute and have different, think about multiple measures of impact, such as alternative metrics beyond citations. And this is something which I think is going to be an important area which we can also contribute through our experience in the area of information systems and communications. And so lastly then, to say that this has significant implications, I believe, going forward for how we, as researchers, do our work, and the collaborative, what I strongly feel is the need to have a stronger collaborative logic in our research capability is important as to be effective, and we need to build on and contribute and understand how we can contribute beyond academia, but also continue to publish work for our own community. Well, what's happening in respect to collaborations? Well, this chart shows the huge shift in sociology over a long period of time, 60 years, but dramatic increase in the number of co-authored papers. You see the same trend in accounting and non-accounting journals, where over the last 25 years or so, you've got a large, significant increase. Doesn't mean that single author papers are not important, they certainly are. It just means that really the ability to meet the ongoing requirements for publications in top journals, I believe that collaborations are central and very important. And so what I wanted to do is to share a few insights from two people that have known this, as I mentioned at the beginning, for over 40 years. They've collaborated well together, Bob Heinings and Royston Greenwood. And here are some of their quotes. You know, we can achieve much more together, essentially. And these are things that we would know from our own research on collaborations and relationships. We need to apply the theories to ourselves and think about it. Are there different strengths? Do we understand the strengths in terms of knowledge bases, framing capabilities, implications for practice or theory that we can develop stronger, better research together? And the last quote, very much highlighting that it's a generative process. It's in the actual doing of it that we understand and can make adjustments for how we work together with our partners in research. It's not always straightforward, as this cartoon shows. Isn't it windy, she says. No, it's Thursday. Oh, so am I. Let's go get a cup of tea. So we're passing ships in the night. Communications isn't there. This happens in research teams. This happens, these are, it's not a natural. We really need to consider and learn from how to do things better. In this case here, across academic disciplines, I mentioned a lot of work being done with different groups over the years. We had, I'll never forget a meeting that we had. This was a knowledge translation group looking at implementation. And each of the groups thought that they were the ones that did implementation, which is the same thing. So recognizing differences and seeing how you can pool together and strengths, very important to bridge those boundaries, those interprofessional boundaries. And so going back to Heinings and Greenwood, what they suggest is that success of collaboration, it not only means at the top there that you have strong ongoing relationships usually over longer periods of time, not publication trigger happy, but looking at working together and sharing different views of how to do research and managing it. And the key thing there, which is important, is how do you respect and manage those collaborations, respect each other's differences. You actually want to have an acceptable tension in a team. You want to be challenged by the other person. You want to maintain the respect and the ability to have a friendship ongoing beyond the papers. And so I like Hickson's frame here of heterogeneity within a basic homogeneity as a way of thinking about how to try and develop successful collaborative relationships in your research. And the last point is a couple of slides on how do we think of contributing beyond academia. I think this is central in many people's minds. Certainly in the UK, we are now 25% of our evaluation every 6 years is how successful we are in showing impact beyond academia with practitioners, policymakers and the like. Public accountability of our funds and how we're using it, and I think also is going to drive this more. And what I would say is that we know a lot, and I think many scholars that have given us good insights in how we frame contributions and make contributions within our field. It's still very tough, but we do have a rich history and work out there to help guide us. But there's not very much on how we go beyond academia to contribute effectively to wider stakeholders. And the way I'm thinking about it at the moment, this is all fresh and therefore it's fairly rough in a sense, but I find the work on expertise very helpful to say, how do we position our expertise in relation to others in their context? And so therefore drawing on some work by Collins and Evans is quite helpful, I think, to recognize different levels of expertise. And they highlight, the field worker when you're just starting out, unless you've been working in the area beforehand, you have little or limited expertise in the domain. And as I gave that example in the London market, over time you gradually learn to speak the language, and hopefully in an action-oriented way you're making some interventions that are helpful, because you can, even though you don't do the practice, you have enough of a fluency in the language to be effective. And so that's what they refer to as interactional expertise, which is different from what they refer to as contributory expertise, which is what we do. As academics, we can contribute and make contributions in our own field of academia with the insights we get from doing the research. And so the question then becomes, yes, we publish in journals, we need to continue to be very strong at that, but to what extent can we communicate more widely? And so what I believe is that we can't become the people that add expertise to the areas of work which we don't have domain skills and knowledge on. But we can use our academic expertise to work with those that do have that expertise in making contributions. And so the idea would be, can we help develop interaction expertise in our concepts amongst stakeholders that are interested and can use and become fluent in the concepts and apply them in their work more effectively. And that's a process of engagement. And can we work with stakeholders then to help them use these concepts, ideas, interaction expertise in different forums to make those contributions come alive?
I think these are really, really interesting ideas. The discussion of the social level, I think we're going to make for I know. Okay. But what I'm hearing more and more, from your experiences and elsewhere, is this pressure of academia to serve industry, society, things outside of academia. And your comment, what can be, you can't always count things that are important, and everything you have is important. So when I think about what you're talking about here, I see a real danger that in this pressure, we're going to jump to things that are accountable, and that we're really going to miss out on things that these are things that are pretty hard to count. So what is your solution to that, Michael?
So
the last point that you made was that there's pressure on having more certifications, and I didn't get the last
the
one.
pressure is to show contribution.
Yes.
It's going to be counted, demonstrated. So I can see there's going to be a tendency to jump towards doing things that can't be counted.
Yes,
Based on your score,
Yes.
it's very important, but they're going to be very hard to count.
Yes.
So tell us your answer.
$1 million question, and that's, you're right. There's a proclivity to count. We can't count and measure, then is the value really there? But I do think, on the other hand, that we're in a society that's moving towards much more of a multidimensional view on value, and recognizing that we need to recognize and go beyond that. So we'll never get around the counting, that will be there. But I do think, the example I would give would be how organizations are becoming more hybrid organizations, how you're seeing the recognition of dual objectives of both profit and social good. And I think that's not just lip service anymore. CSR earlier might not be true to its name. So I do think that we need to be creative in our research and help people to understand the different forms of value that are both countable and non-countable, whether it's impactful, even to help define what is impact in a wider way that includes but is not exclusive to counting. So it's a $1 million question, but I do think it's something which we can join forces and provide some answers to. Thanks for that. Linda, you had a question?
Yes. I noticed across a couple of your studies, particularly the manual with the resistance accommodation, the boundaries are a critical factor. And I'm wondering what you think from observing practices about boundary work, and where should we go with this on innovation, and even over stakeholder relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of value. In fact, if you want to hear an in-depth discussion on that, and I'm not skirting the question, there is a PDW or a symposium on boundaries in healthcare, and which really recognize, that's tomorrow, plugging in at 3 to 4:30. That's one of the big objectives is to say, well, materiality, different ways in which material engagements as well as discourse and is critical in the reshaping or potential reshaping of boundaries and the jurisdictional fights that might happen across boundaries. So I do think that there is really excellent work that's being developed to take account and recognize and use theories like these and others to understand what's happening in boundary crossing and the jurisdictional context that we know from earlier work from people like Abbott and Rabbit on the things of boundaries. So yes, I think it pertains very much to that, and there's really good work. Come tomorrow at 3 and you'll hear more. Yes, Emmanuel.
Thanks so much for bringing the theory of practice. We badly need it, and impact is one of the first problems of the Academy of Management. So how could your view save the Academy of Management? And do you think that co-authoring with practitioners could be a way to involve them or having more relevant case studies?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, the latter because it's easier. I'm not claiming to be a savior of the Academy, but certainly you touched on an important point there. And there's those who practice academia boundaries are fluid and need to be understood, educated. I do believe that there's a huge potential with the right practitioner to engage with access to data, huge amounts of experience that they will have. The challenges are often the different time frames. So one needs to appreciate that or find out if the practitioner is expecting what kinds of contributions, what's of value to that, and what time frame they manage those expectations around time frames. Because I would say if they're not research-minded or have experience in research, there is an education there as to what kinds of case studies, what kinds of projects are possible, and which other ones need to be protected to offer the opportunity for academic contributions to come out of them over time. So it's a dual strategy, much education and an understanding. But yes, it can definitely work. In fact, I guess the plug for my dean, who is very much passionate about deep engagement for soft law, and he argues that a lot of this work has always been with practitioners as well as then trying to publish in top quality journals. Now, getting that balance of how you do it, the process is really important.
So much fascinating talk. I'd like to hear your thoughts about design science as a methodology. Looking at your strategies, like if you're emphasizing keeping a distance, being reflective. So I'm wondering if there is a place of incorporating this research method in a way to co-create technology rather than studying it retrospectively.
Yeah, a great question, and I was hoping to try and keep the balance, all possibilities. I'm thinking of design science as something which might fall maybe under the hybrid practice. But design science has a lot of benefits. One would, in terms of the emphasis on trying to propose new futures rather than only understanding what we do. So there is a role for certain projects where design science would be very fruitful. So I would certainly see that as a part of the portfolio and important for the work going forward. Yes. Start with
Michael, thank you so much for this very engaging presentation. This may be a little bit of a biased question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. What do you think is the role of PhD students and collaborators in this process?
yes.
I have a dual identity here. I'm putting on two hats here, but
there's a very, some of you may have heard, it's an old joke, it is a very nice joke, which says how, one day Albert Einstein's going around giving his talks, and he falls sick, really sick, and he can't talk. And so what the chauffeur says to him, guess what? You don't have to go up and talk. I've heard it 100 times. I will give the talk. So he goes and gives the talk, and then he gets a really hard question at the end, and he says, I can't believe it. That's such an easy question. I'll ask my chauffeur at the back to answer it. Well, now the reason I say that is actually no tongue-in-cheek, but I was going to refer this to Karina Frey, another PhD to answer. Because I know that's been a passion for you both. But rather than do that, I'll just say that indeed, PhD students, what I've been discussing actually, I would say, if it's not happening already in the next couple of years, you can say, of course that's what you do. You have to understand that PhD students are always at the forefront of thinking in these ways, and they know the pressures in the market better than anybody else. So it is important for PhD students to be engaged in these ideas and to be developing an understanding of, first and foremost, the academic contributions to their field, but also designing early on in their studies for wider impact. Yes.
Related to that question, you talked about collaboration. Collaboration is a good word, but it's not easy. It may be almost impossible across the different fields. So, what do you think? The major partners are also.
I don't think you want me to be here for an hour and a half. But no, but thank you for that question. It's a very, very important question, and it is a difficult one. I've showed and I discussed findings in Greenwood. I could have and I should have probably used Levine and Vast in our discipline as another set of collaborators that have been very successful over time as well. They are perhaps more the exceptions, and it isn't easy. What I would say though, and why I picked those two, is that you cannot, try to have a Facebook logic on collaboration. You can't collaborate with 15 people or 10 people. It's a process of deep investment of understanding, as we said here, of the strengths and weaknesses, the willingness to have the acceptable tension and to work through things. that means essentially that you've got to work with a relatively small subset of people, at least for large programs. Of course, we have to work with our PhD students. We love to, great minds. But in terms of collaborating, I'm not suggesting that collaborating is easy or that we just go and try and do multiple. In fact, I think that is part of the problem at the moment, is that the pressures of publishing, you are finding a lot of incentive for people to be striking out way too many collaborations, which cannot be fruitful because it's a very difficult process, as you highlight. So I don't have any quick fixes, but there's a lot of work on understanding, again, collaborating across boundaries and collaboration more generally. That would be a starting point for us, and I'd be happy to talk through more of that afterwards with you in detail.
What do you think of the French theory of practice of Pierre Bourdieu?
It's wonderful. In fact, I will answer that by saying that it is truly why you have practice-driven institutionalism. The argument is that you have people like Giddens and Bourdieu, and we can argue as to where the ideas got transferred, but these are really important practice scholars, and indeed I've had the opportunity with another PhD student, Renee Vida, to work with him on youth looking at Bourdieu and the way in which he brings a different dimension and a very interesting practice theory perspective, very much an understanding.